Hi everyone. I see the last few straddlers making it back in, and I see we've got a packed out audience, and I'm not surprised. I've followed this person for a couple of years, but I know there are some people in the audience that have followed them for 6 years, which is crazy given that she's only 26. And you'll notice that as a running theme. Grace has never let age define her path, whether it's becoming a Sunday Times bestseller, having a chart-topping podcast, being Forbes 30 under 30, having a cool 500,000 YouTube subscribers. The success is crazy. And so what I really want to know is not only does she manage to do all of that, but she's also managed her 2 businesses, Tala and Shreddy. How does she manage to achieve all of that? Well, I would like to know. Please welcome to the stage, Grace Beverley. Okay, excellent, cool.
Just a bit correct.
Amazing. So thank you so much for being here. And I literally know I've got colleagues and friends in the audience who are obsessed with you. So really excited about that. We're going to discuss a few different topics here. A key one being productivity. I know you've got your book out, you've got your planners, loads of cool stuff doing there, and you have a different angle to it. So I really want to talk about that first. But I want to kind of kick us off with a quick fire round productivity edition.
Go.
So, deep work or multitask?
Depends on the time, both, but set.
Okay, task list or time boxing?
Also both. You can't be going with them.
Okay, power nap or power through?
Power through.
Okay, good, me too. Email, call or text?
Email.
Okay. Work late or wake up early?
Neither.
Blog it or vlog it?
Well, I'd say blog it.
Okay. And lastly, and the most importantly, Barbie or Oppenheimer?
Both?
There's different sides of you.
Clearly, I'm not very good at quickfire round. You learn something new every day.
Cool. So before we get into the productivity stuff, you have a really cool and interesting story, and I want to give you the opportunity to kind of play that out for the audience. How did you become the Grace Beverley in front of me today?
I'll try and give you a whistle-stop tour. As you can probably tell by my quickfire round, I have no ability to do anything in a concise way, so we'll do our best. Yeah. I started, I guess, what's turned into my career now when I had just turned 18. I started posting on Instagram, and I purely started it as a diary, really, to try and get into fitness. I, like many people, just had the experience of constantly trying and failing, as I would see it, or kind of going too hard and then falling off. And that would happen the entire time. So I set up this Instagram account to essentially keep myself accountable. It was completely anonymous. I didn't post my face until I had 10,000 followers. And it was very much just a pure kind of diary and accountability platform for myself. And that's kind of the tone of voice and the way I spoke and the kind of platform, what I used it for, stayed relatively the same from that point onwards. I went to university a year later, and I just kind of continued posting online as part of that, and then for the next 3 years kind of posted on YouTube, really talking, I guess, just constantly being like, oh, it's me here again doing another essay, which, consistency. Yeah. So people clearly couldn't fault me for that. And in my first year at university, I started my first business, which is called Shreddy. And that is it's turned into a fitness tech business, but it's been through so many different evolutions. In my third year at university, I started Tala, which is my fashion brand where we make clothing out of sustainable fabrics and talk a lot about the importance of sustainability and giving better options in a market where, we know we are contributing to the problem because we are a fashion brand, but we believe very strongly that if you don't give people better options, then you're essentially saying go cold turkey or shop badly. And we're we like to be, I've got to stop doing that because I'm really crackling, and essentially we want to be in a position where we're giving people options when they do decide to shop. Since then, graduated and have spent the past few years growing those businesses, and I guess most recently, or actually about nearly 2 years ago now, we closed our first funding round at Tala, which was a VC-based funding round, and we've just been, I guess, aiming to grow it since then, and been doing that pretty well, which is very exciting.
So where did the productivity come into it? So obviously you said you started Tala in your 3rd year. Obviously at uni, I know that's a very difficult year with finals and things like that. Is that where productivity started, or did it start before that?
I think it's quite
obviously
funny that
starts all the time.
Yeah, it's quite funny because there's been this kind of running theme throughout my entire career, I guess, where the thing I'm doing is not productivity, because the thing I've been doing is either running a business or university or fitness or a startup in general, or writing a book or whatever it might be. However, obviously, the thing that ties all of those together is how you actually get it done, and how you get it done in a way that doesn't burn you out, and how you get it done in a way that is maintainable and adds to your life in a world where we need to work quite a lot or have a certain amount of output in order to be able to, I guess, get to where we want to get to. And so I guess the string that has tied all of those things together has been, how am I able to do all of these things whilst not working all the time? And I think that probably one of the biggest misconceptions about myself is that I am the type of person who works all the time, and the reason I talk about productivity so much is actually because of the opposite. I really am not the type of person who can work all the time. I believe very strongly in being fulfilled by your work. I think in a world where we need to work a lot of the time, it is a real privilege to be fulfilled by your work. However, I would rather be productive in order to give myself more time to either fit more within the time that I am working, or to be able to very clearly border those days in order to, I was kind of joking but also kind of not when I said neither early mornings or late nights. I think people, would be surprised at how strictly I pretty much treat my days, but I get a lot done in them, and that is, I guess, all down to the productivity side of things and what I kind of consider to be my personal productivity methods, which I've been using for years and years before I even codified them into the book and then the planners.
Yes, okay, so you kind of raised a point there, which is about wanting to have clearer lines between work-life balance. I guess that's kind of one school of thought of it, and then the other school of thought of it is there's that quote which is if you do something you love, you never work a day in your life. Do you firmly sit on that work-life balance side, or do you see yourself kind of somewhere in between, or are you kind of working it out?
I would say within those two options, I would definitely say that I'm within the work-life balance side, but that doesn't mean that I don't believe that work-life balance is about keeping your life separate from your work. I think it's very important to have boundaries. However, I think it's actually pretty unrealistic in a world of social media and 24-hour news cycles, etc., to see them so clearly delineated. And I think if you're constantly trying to keep this, especially if you're trying to get closer to a 50-50 in terms of how your life operates, in terms of how much you're caring about work and life, it's going to be very, very hard to get close to that 50-50. I would rather become more fulfilled by my work in order to get a better work-life balance, whilst also making sure I'm really maintaining those boundaries. But I would say that I think this idea of do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life has really been missold to us. I think it creates this expectation that, if you do something you love, you'll never work a day in your life. And I do something I love, and I probably 2 days a week I will have a really shit time. Sorry, I don't know. No. Allowed to swear.
Yeah, but more authentic the better.
And I think that's work. It's less about the subject of work. And don't get me wrong, I think that it's very important to try and find the elements of work that you really like. For example, the past few weeks I've been working from home because we're moving offices at the moment, and I found that really, really, really hard. And I've realised that that's so much because I need to have, I guess, break up things between being with people and talking about things with people and versus having my head down, because I will just get fixated and I will get under 100 steps in, which is pretty impressive.
I've been that low as well, so it's not a good place.
But I think I do think the idea of kind of never working a day in your life because you love something is actually just setting us up for failure, because I do think it, whilst it's a huge privilege to love your work, and I do think it, but you're still going to work a day in your life. In fact, you're going to work a lot of days in your life, and the likelihood is is that no matter what you're doing, it's still going to come with elements of the job or sector that you are not going to enjoy and are necessary for your success.
Yep.
And it is obviously discipline, and obviously also an understanding that it isn't just because you love what you do doesn't mean you love every part of what you do.
Yeah.
That is incredibly important, and I also think pretty character building and gets you better at your job as well. But to me, yeah, that's pretty firmly kind of where I sit, and I do think that when we create this, I guess, idolization of work as anything other than work, I think that it's really, it can be really damaging because of the expectations it sets.
Okay, so, and you've clearly, like, as you said, you've been working from home recently, and I know that the eagle-eyed people or people who are watching your content, you've recently got a puppy, so congrats on that.
Thank you so much.
Has that impacted your productivity? Because I feel like it would have impacted mine.
Yes, and it's been, well, to be fair, it was planned exactly around the office move in terms of like approximate time that we would want to be kind of thinking about that. I sound like we've had a baby. Very aware that I did not give birth to the puppy, but it is, you know, they have free reign and they do very much move when you're not expecting it, and then there's like a poo and a wee everywhere and you're on a call and it's a lot. But what's so funny about that is that I've spent this kind of past few weeks, I guess, having to make do with not being in my ideal work scenario. And that has actually shown me so much about myself in terms of the ways that I really do work best, and how important it is for me to stick to the things that work for me, including making sure I have people time in there, including making sure that I actually have times when I can give my undivided attention to my work. Obviously, that is a huge privilege to be in that situation. Like, I'm very aware when I speak about productivity and I speak about all of these things that I have no dependence, and I have, you know, I'm in a very specific situation. But I also think that that's all the more reason to be able to kind of break down these things and be very clear about and delineate what you're doing when. And to me, I guess I was very thankful for having those hacks in order to make sure I was still very much able to stay on top of things. It sounds very dramatic for getting a
So you use the word hacks there, and like I'm a bit of like a personal development geek, and over the course of my years I've read like the 4-hour work week and all of this stuff, and hacks is something that everyone seems to talk about nowadays. Do you genuinely believe we can hack productivity?
It's so funny because every time I say the word hack and I talk about like, oh, follow this productivity method, I feel like I sound like a scammer. So I'm very aware of that in my head. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's all about whether it's kind of selling this completely unmaintainable idea. And I've read the 4-hour work week too, and I think there are lots of different methods that I absolutely believe that some people would be able to do them. I think the large majority of people would not. And I think that, you know, I always try and be really transparent about is obviously the fact that different productivity methods will work for everyone. However, the methods that I have used and codified and shared are very much based on that. They're not based on creating unrealistic changes. I guess they're not meant to be a sprint. They are meant to be things that you can add into your day for 5 minutes at the beginning of the day that are just going to make you less overwhelmed, have better visibility, and therefore be able to tackle your workload better, and with less likelihood of burning out, etc., etc. They are things in terms of, you know, techniques where you can split up your to-do list, which sounds like the easiest thing in the world, but actually if you're not doing it consistently, it's and using that in order to be able to time block, I very much notice the days where I'm not following those rules versus when I am.
From an output perspective.
Yeah, from an output perspective, and also from a feeling like you've achieved something that day perspective. I always feel like if I just race straight into my work and I haven't done my techniques at the beginning of the day in terms of how I split it out and block my time, I get to this point and I might get to midday, for example, and there's so much that's been done, but because it wasn't written down in the original way, I'd kind of time blocked it in the way I split the to-do lists, I didn't know what had been done in that time, and therefore there's kind of, you're constantly feeling like it's getting away with you. I think a lot of the productivity methods and hacks that I talk about are entirely about being able to categorize, being able to break things down, being able to prioritize. And I think that all the best productivity methods are techniques in order to be able to do that. They aren't about only working 4 hours a week.
Yes.
They are about acknowledging that you're not going to be able to only work 4 hours a week. 40 hours a week, you are. You're not going to be able to only work 4 hours a week, but you can, the 40, probably more likely, hours that you are going to work a week, you can get far more done in that time if you are ordering it in the correct way.
Okay. So what's really interesting about you is that, as you say, it's not productivity for productivity's sake. What's driven you is your journey with your businesses and your growth through life, and the people that follow your content. That's what, for me, makes it all the more engaging about the productivity discussion, is because it's supported your amazing journey. On that journey, you said there are different methods, but on that journey, have you picked up any common misconceptions when it comes to productivity, or is it just about method?
I think a lot of the misconception is the fact that productivity is about that kind of idea that, like, you know, like work all the time, hustle, like sleep when you're dead, this very kind of like macho work rhetoric, where it's kind of all around the idea that actually you just need to work. And if you're not the type of person who can work until 10 p.m. every night and get up at 5 a.m., be part of the 5 a.m. club and like all of this, then you're kind of weak. And actually, I think realistically, sure, there will be people who do that. I'm personally not one of those people. And I personally don't think I would be productive if I was doing that. I would be busy. And I think that's a real difference. And I think that one thing that I really try and show as a differentiation between, you know, productivity, busyness, efficiency, effectiveness, all of these different terms that mean very, very different things. My priority is always about being productive and effective. AKA being productive is getting as much done in the least possible amount of time, and effective is making sure those tasks are in the right direction, in line with longer term trajectories or goals that I've set. And I think that you have to make sure it's those two things. I think if you get in your head too much about making sure that you are always busy, I think actually it's, I guess, you know, it being able to reprioritize that and realign in terms of what you actually want. And for me, what I actually want is to be able to log off most days at a reasonable time and actually be making some pretty big moves in that time as well by I guess, using my time correctly.
I feel like there's like a bit of a busy cycle where people start being busy, and then it's kind of like a multiplier, and then you just get used to being busy, and you're like, I'm busy.
Well, that's also, no, I completely agree, and I think we're probably all guilty of that. Like, it's it's the first thing we say when someone's like, oh, how are you? Oh, busy, like really busy. And it is like, I speak about it a lot in the book, and this kind of, there's this part of it which is about kind of, I guess, like toxic workaholism and being rewarded for that workaholism, and the idea that, you know, busyness is a badge of honor and all of this. And it's so funny because it also completely depends on what type of sector you work in, whether busyness is a badge of honor or whether it's something that's looked down upon, and all of these different things that we really need to analyze. But I also think that there's definitely been days where, and there definitely are still days where I will, in order to, I guess, have that dopamine hit of getting things done, will race through, and this is why I think it's so important to split up your to-do list in terms of how long each task takes. So my way of doing it is by quick ticks tasks and projects. Quick ticks are under 5 minutes, tasks are 5 to 30 minutes, and projects are 30 minutes plus, usually made up of a few tasks. And I think one of the most important things about doing that is that you will probably find that a lot of the time you whiz through your quick ticks and tasks, and you are doing things, you might be doing them productively, however effectively in the right direction, and really being the things that you need to get done that day is not always going to be the right thing. And that is why I also think it's incredibly important to have every single day 3 non-negotiables that you are going to get done, and they cannot be quick ticks. They are always going to be something, and at least one of them has to be in line with your, I guess it might be your monthly goal, it might be your quarterly goal. But I think it's so easy then to mistake, and I think this is what leads to burnout as well. If you spend a lot of time working a lot and you're constantly ticking things off, and you feel like you're treading water, like you feel like you're not necessarily getting in that direction. And I think that is also the difference between just being productive or just being busy and actually being effective and doing it in the right direction.
So you one of the quick ticks concept is something that I really resonate with, because I feel like I like diver and like don't get those quick ticks done, and actually it's a multiplier. So you get some of those quick ticks out the way and like, oh, I'm on the roll. And then and so one thing I wanted to ask you about, and I have a bit of an experience of this at the moment, is that you alluded kind of like, if you can't work at 10 a.m., you can't work at 10 a.m. And I'm all for task lists, but especially now where I work in a more creative role, coming up with ideas and with content, I can't put 5 till 8 creativity time. And so how do you deal with those kind of like unexpected moments of inspiration? Unfortunately for me, they come at like just as I'm going to bed at like 1 a.m. in the morning. So how do you deal with those like unexpected moments of inspiration?
So I would say that that's one of the most important things about really understanding where your role is, where your strengths are, and also where your weaknesses are as well. Yep. So in terms of like, I can completely understand, and I'm not in as creative a role. So I, for example, probably won't have the situation where I kind of sit down and I'm like, oh, I need to be creative now. Like, I just need to make something. I'll obviously have times where I find it harder, and therefore I'll usually in those times I do things which I call kind of creativity triggers. Like there'll be things where in order to warm up into this kind of flow state or this deep work, I'll listen to an associated podcast or watch an associated YouTube video, anything that's like, or like scroll through some posts on it, whatever it might be, anything that starts to get you thinking about it in the same way as you would do like a warm up at the beginning of like a workout or at the beginning of even like a class at school, that type of thing that gets yourself in the headspace. And I think that's particularly important in roles where you do lots of different types of things, because you'll be creative, but you'll also probably need to chase invoices and do other things like that. So it's about like jumping between those two things and understanding where your work is specific to those types of things. So I would say that in that specific circumstance, always knowing that actually when those things come along, obviously, if you can sit down and do some of that now, great. If not, always making sure you have a space and I guess I literally have a table for myself where I can brain dump, and it's set up in specific things. It will be like I have a pain points one, which will be like, what is the problem? What is causing this problem? What are the proposed solutions? And then I'll literally put it in my calendar for when I'm picking that up. So it might be 9 a.m. the next morning, but it might be the fact that I'm on holiday and actually I don't want to pick that up the next morning. So it's about having these techniques in order that you can take advantage of those moments. And obviously you don't really want to play down those moments, so you don't really want to not take advantage of those moments, but it's also understanding that if you are entirely, I guess, you're entirely having to operate based on just when the inspiration comes, that's also going to be really difficult as well. So I guess it's about making sure you have things in place for when those do come along, and making sure you have those things in place when they're actually not coming along, and you really, because at the same time, I'm sure you'll be the first person to say that sometimes you also do just need to, like, there's a deadline or like something is there and you actually do need to get it down. So there are different ways to deal with both those side of things, and understanding how your, I guess, mindset is when you sit down to do things versus when you do it after you go on a walk, or whether you do it early or late, and knowing what type of person you really are.
It's like those small things you can change, understanding the location. I actually brought it up at drinks yesterday, and Advita, one thing I do is like it gets to, Advita, you actually mentioned that actually instead of just like writing loads of notes, which is what I do, once you start writing notes, you end up on a spiral, and then you end up in LinkedIn, and before you know it, you've lost 2 hours. And Advita was like, actually just voice note, because that stops you starting to write and then ending up in different apps and whatever. So like little things like that, I'm like, oh, I didn't actually think of that.
And I also think what's so important about that is really knowing yourself, because I think that, for example, for me, that wouldn't work at all, because I'm visual. So for me, if I was sending a voice note, I'm never going to listen to that again, because I need to like look at it within 2 seconds and be like, okay, back in this headspace, this is how I'm going to deal with it, which is exactly why I literally have those different templates with prompts for myself, whether that is a brain dump one or a pain points one, or like whatever it might be, a new ideas one, anything. I have those specific prompts for myself, which I know I'm going to need for when I start that project later. I'm going to need exactly what I was thinking within that moment. However, I have so many friends and also people I work with, and I think it's really important to know how your like direct reports work in this type of way, and that type of thing. Like when you're able to kind of send a voice note and listen to it later and like hear the excitement in your voice and like talking about all of these different things, and it not necessarily need to be linear and look nice. I think that's very important as well. But I think it just goes to show how different everyone is in terms of like whether they're a more visual person or whether they're the type of person who needs to, you know, actually talk to someone about it or whatever it might be. And I think the best thing you can do, and what I've made sure that my productivity method is never one approach to any of these types of things. It is a series of tools in which you can apply to whatever might be different in those types of things, and how you can kind of make the most out of that, because everyone is so incredibly different in the way they work and the types of work they need to avoid and the types of work they probably need to spend more time on.
Nice. The next one I'm asking for a friend. Many people struggle with procrastination. I think one time I literally had a deadline, and then I spent 30 minutes researching productivity hacks, which ironically was unproductive. Me and my colleague Katie, we call it the productivity roundabout, which is you procrastinate with one little thing and then you find something else to procrastinate with, and then before you know it, you forget what you were doing originally. Do you have any methods to overcome that productivity roundabout?
Yeah.
A procrastination roundabout?
Yeah. I think it's again one of those things where you will know your specific triggers. You will know whether you are the type of person who, and this is me, for example, if there's something that I've been procrastinating, I need to do that the next day. The first thing I do. I often procrastinate with planning because I really like planning, in case anyone else. I would rather, it's so strange. I would rather spend the time like blocking out my day and doing my to-do list and delegating things and know exactly where I'm going to do all of these things. But realistically, if I've been procrastinating something for a few days and it's important and it needs to get done, I cannot even do my to-do list before I've done that thing the next morning. And that will be in my calendar as if it is a meeting. And I understand that that's obviously not going to work for everyone. And there are going to be people who need to actually warm up before that type of thing. For me, I do the eat the frog thing, which is very much like start with the task that you least want to do. And I know exactly what those are for tomorrow and I am dreading them. But they are in there and I can't even get onto doing my to-do list for the day before I have done that. And I think it's really important to kind of like know where you sit within that. It might also be the type of thing where you do it based on a reward system, so you're only able to do something that you want to do more once you've kind of done that other one. Also things like making sure you are warmed up correctly, so whether it is like looking through someone's things who inspires you, or going on a walk and listening to a podcast before, or whatever it might be. I would also say that like minimizing distractions is very, very, very important, and newsfeed blockers, airplane mode, all of these things are made to help you. And I do think that in those types of situations, it's just about knowing your triggers and knowing exactly what's going to draw you away from something, and making sure that like when I'm doing deep work, I turn my phone off and it is not in the same room as me, and that's not in a kind of like really organized, like my phone's downstairs. I literally lob my phone across the room. Anyone who's ever working from home with me is like, are you okay? Because I'll need to get it away, or I will literally give it to a friend or a colleague and be like, do not give me this back until I show you that piece of work I do. And it's just about creating accountability systems for yourself.
That'll probably work for me because I'll be too lazy to get up and go and get the phone.
Exactly. No, give it to someone and say you'll pay them $5 if you come and get it back before that time. Expensive habit. Very expensive habit.
I'll give it a go. So it's clear you've got your productivity shit together. Can I? Yeah, it's too late now.
I started that.
You started it. I'm blaming you. But also, you have 2 businesses with employees. Do you try and help embed some of those productivity practices in those businesses?
Probably much more than people would ever like. The good way is giving lots of planners to people, and being like, you can have a planner if you would like. In like a suggestive way.
The Passag,
for free. But I think that I really genuinely do believe in my methods very strongly, and think that they really help in order to. They've been things that I've developed over a long period of time, in order to be able to jump between lots of different things. I have never. And I think this is one of my biggest flaws. I have never done only one thing. From the point that I started the Instagram did an internship and was doing that at the same time, to doing uni and running the first business and then the second business and doing social media and all of this. I have never done one thing at once. And in order to be able to juggle those things, I have had to create these systems in order to be able to be, and I feel this a lot, at every single company that I work at, I have to maintain a standard of pretty much working there full time, because if everyone else is, that they're going to expect a response time that's pretty similar. And therefore I have to have things in place to, enable me to do the best I can do and not bottleneck as well. If I'm only working somewhere for 30% of the time and I'm bottlenecking accordingly, so nothing can go ahead, if that's actually not going to work either. So I feel like, I do find it's really important to help and encourage and talk about these things. I also think we aren't necessarily the best at knowing that actually when we're joining the workforce or starting a new job, you're not necessarily going to know the best way to kind of plan your time, or to which tasks you need to prioritize, or all of these different things. I think you learn that over the time, but I also think if after 6 months you still don't really know, and you're still finding yourself missing some deadlines, etc., making sure you have those mechanisms in place to make sure that you don't miss those, and you're really on top of things, and you're prioritizing pretty fiercely and updating any stakeholders on anything when you've had to deprioritize something you're doing for them. All of these things come into the idea of having a good productivity method, which, as I've mentioned, will kind of be different for everyone. But yeah, I mean, I obviously value the methods I have very highly, but I also believe that different things work for everyone, and that I would really like people to essentially pick and choose what works for them. But I'm always very happy to, when people are, I would much rather someone say, I'm actually really struggling with prioritizing this, and actually being able to get on a call with them and be like, literally write me out all of the things you currently have to do, and I'll show you how I would put this into a priority list, who I would update in terms of deadlines, how I would kind of resort all of this. And I do that quite a lot because I clearly am quite passionate about it.
So if we zoom out on that kind of productivity discussion, we both kind of referenced this a little bit earlier, but I call them like productivity bros, like hustle, hustle, hustle.
Yes.
And your narrative on productivity takes much more a stance on health and well-being, where it's so absent in that conversation. How do you check in on the health and well-being side? How do you bake that into your productivity process?
Yeah, and I think what you said last is what is most important. I think when you look at productivity and self-care as two different schools of thought, you are already fighting a losing battle. I think what we often get wrong is we read a business book or a self-help book, and we'll try and stick to that for 2 weeks, and then we'll fall off. Then we'll read a kind of self-care book, and we'll try and be the best friend and family member and deprioritize work and all of this for 2 weeks. The answer is that neither of those things are going to work in their entirety. It is the reality that we have to work, and it is the reality that we probably want life outside of work as well. And therefore, we cannot see productivity and self-care as two different things. How I've always referred to them is two sides of the same coin. You cannot have one without the other. You cannot have productivity without self-care, and you cannot have self-care without productivity. And I think that one's really important to say as well. I don't believe that self-care is all about candles and baths and journaling. I think that self-care is also about making sure you've reached your deadlines and making sure that you are reaching the things that you set at the beginning of the year or the beginning of the quarter, or the things that you said to your boss that you were really excited about doing and you haven't actually done, and then you're kind of wanting to get to the next level of your job. To me, that is self-care, just as productivity is often knowing when to shut your laptop and being like, do you know what, if I could stare at this for the next 2 hours, and I would be much better doing this tomorrow morning, or coming at this with a clear head. And I think that it's just so important to remember that at all stages of life, that the productivity and self-care are not two different things. They are two sides of the same coin. They cannot be seen without one another. And so I think that, I almost see productivity as this kind of like, I have it in the name of the planners and all of this, and it almost, as I said, it kind of makes me feel like a scammer sometimes. Like, it makes me feel like this kind of like hustle culture, this very like go, 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 this very busyness, work all the time. I actually think what's so clear is then our misconception of productivity, because productivity is getting more done in less time, and making sure that we are really working effectively and really spending the right time doing the right things. And for me, that is self-care. And I think it's so clear that we've probably got that wrong whenever we address those as two different things.
I agree, and you kind of learned that the hard way as well.
Yes.
You lived that journey.
Oh, 100%. And I've been through... I would say I was pretty badly burnt out at one time, and really thought kind of like I'd just very much overdone it and was probably going to just not be able to function for ages. And it really, the further away you can stay from that point, the better. But that doesn't mean, I think there is also this culture then of seeing people who, like, we still have this really negative view of something like burnout as just like not being able to hack it and all of those types of things. And I actually think that, again, in being able to create productivity methods for yourself that allow you to not be able to burn out, whilst also acknowledging that you probably want a promotion, you probably want to make more money, you probably want to like work more effectively and reach X goals and all of this, and that they do not have to be at odds with one another.
It's so important not to gloss over that, because like that's where a lot of the other content fails, is that it shows the pros and the outcomes, but it completely glosses over like the wider conversation. You're right, it's two sides of the same coin. Next question. So being productive in yourself is one thing, but also productivity in the nicest way possible isn't the sexiest topic.
No.
So how do you you seem to have something where you can really resonate with people, and that topic connects with different types of people. What do you think it is that you do that makes it interesting?
I wouldn't necessarily say that I make it interesting. I think I have a
Or
very
sexy.
clear, or sexy. I think I have a very clear understanding that when we deny the fact that we all have to be somewhat productive, we are probably not getting a very clear view of the world as it is today and the way that we need to operate and pay our bills and even be fulfilled, because it does take up X amount of our time. I think that a lot of people can resonate with that because almost everyone is within that subset of people. Like, the large majority of people have to work. And therefore, how can we do that better in a way that preserves ourselves more and also achieves more? And I think that those things, as we've said, it's traditionally we've made people either identify with, like, I'm a really hard worker, or someone who cares about their personal life. And I don't think we can ever purely put those things in two pots. And I think the sooner we talk about those things, as I've said, kind of as two sides of the same coin, but also with a real acknowledgement that actually it's not like we can't be selective about it. I originally wrote the book because at the beginning of the pandemic, I felt that any time you'd post online about self-care, people would be like, well, people have to work, like, we're having to work through this. And then when you would post about productivity, people would be like, this is a pandemic, not a productivity contest. And it was like, well, kind of both are really true. And if both cause such a passionate reaction, then we're probably dealing with both wrong. And I think that, I guess, I really aim to talk about all of this in a very realist way of not promising solutions that are unrealistic and not promising suddenly being able to, work 4 hours a week, but actually being able to tackle what you already do better, hopefully be more fulfilled by it, hopefully be able to get more done, hopefully be able to move up a bit quicker because you are able to manage your time better. It's not necessarily about doing more. It's just about, out of the time you are giving, being able to get more out of that time specifically.
Okay, sticking with the kind of content strand, like, to paint a picture, the audience in front of us a lot of them are internal communicators, employee experience professional, have an ability to, or always try to create content that connects with people, and you have a kind of reputation of creating winning content. When you create content, what do you have front of mind?
I think my view on this is probably quite unique to my situation in the way that at every stage of actually, no, that's probably incorrect. At most stages of my career, content has been I guess, substrand of what I've been doing separately. So whether I've been at university as my main thing, or whether I've been at an internship as my main thing, or whatever it has been, the content has always been the side part. I wouldn't call it a side hustle because it's been, something that I've been doing like very firmly as a role, or at university it was my only kind of paid work and all of that. But I think that that's allowed the content itself to feel like it needs to constantly perform less. Like, it's more about being able to, even now, I found over the past 2 weeks, I'm like, what do I even post about? I'm not at the office. Like, I'm literally just sitting here getting things done. Like, I have nothing to report, like nothing to share. And then I was kind of like, well, how do people who don't go to offices post about things? Like, wow, this is really a whole new world. But I think that it's meant that the content I have created has been very, kind of hate to use the word authentic because it's such a buzzword, but is also important in the way that it is purely telling people and showing people and bringing people in on a journey of what is already being done, rather than the content being about the content itself. I'm not sure if I've explained that well at all, but I do think that a lot of it has been around the fact that, when I'm doing content, it will never be purely for the reason of doing content. It will be in order to either add value or share part of a journey. And generally that's probably meant that the tone of voice and the kind of approach to it has been quite accessible and just how I would say it to a friend. I feel like that's always been my approach to social media.
Sure, I can attest to that, having followed some of your content. So if we kind of take that strand a little bit, if we zoom out on that, do you have clear journeys? You define the journeys that you want to take people on the journey for?
So when I sit down to do, it might be content for Tala, for example, I absolutely plan around what I want to say and what value I want to add or what I want to impart on the people who are kind of listening. I always talk about social media for brands, very importantly, is about telling people something, not selling them something. And I think that's pretty known, I guess, in the industry today in terms of like how you really talk to people on social media, especially when product is involved. But I think for me, there's always been a similar approach I've taken to all different types of content, whether it has been about productivity or whether it's been about politics or whether it has been about actually sharing product. It has always been that kind of talking to a friend type approach. I'm not an actress, so I'm not necessarily... So
it's more like natural.
As in that type of thing.
To talk about this to a friend, and therefore maybe yes.
Right, but of course, when I am specifically doing content for, it might be promotional content, there are absolutely key messages that I want to get in there. However, it means that I always shy away from anything where that key messaging wouldn't easily be brought up as it would in a conversation to a friend. It probably also helps that I am that type of friend that if I find something I like, I will like forcibly tell all of my friends about it, even if no one inquired for a recommendation. So that probably lends myself pretty well to the world of social media where you can do that for free.
You seem like such a natural on camera, but I'm sure it wasn't always that way. That sounds really shady. I didn't mean that.
That's so fine. I'm sure it wasn't.
But you must have experimented with different formats and things like that. How do you do you have any advice? Because a lot of us didn't necessarily grow up blogging and vlogging, but now this is the way we communicate. And so do you have any advice for people that are trying to experiment with formats?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is about testing and learning. I think that I probably look back on, let's take my YouTube journey, for example, and I probably look back on it and I see the kind of end stage of things and how I just knew what would perform and I knew what would do well and what I wanted to do even if it wouldn't do well and all of these different types of things. However, at the beginning of that, there was definitely a long period of time of putting things out that I thought would do really well and then them not doing really well and then kind of having to amend formats and amend thumbnails and all of this. I think the golden rule for me has always been about knowing what works and replicating always, obviously, but also experimenting enough to know that you are able to evolve when those tried and tested ones don't start to perform. And I think that's always the case. And in social media, we are on a cycle where things go pretty quickly. We know with trends, we know with formats in general. We know, I even look at the video content that's been going crazy over the past 2 years, and it's so different from where my content was back then. I was always about long form content, and actually it's not in that kind of space at all anymore. But I think it's always just about making sure that you're always obviously looking at the data. For me, that's always been second nature. It's always been about looking at the analytics. It's always been about actually knowing exactly how things perform and what doesn't and what does with which audiences as well, because there can be things that perform with certain audiences to a really high success rate.
Okay, this is working with this audience, but not this audience. This is the audience I have for that business. And so therefore, we try more with that content.
Even in the early days of YouTube, I would never, I would film content for fun in between or whatever, but if I was trying to make content that would perform, it would always be based on analytics. And pretty much every platform has enough insight in order to allow you to do that. And often, I think also often it could be, well, I don't know whether it was the title or the thumbnail or the kind of subject itself, and then be okay, well, let's test another thumbnail like that on a separate one. Let's test another title like that on a separate one. Let's test another, and it's just allowing yourself to really just have a bit of fun with the experimentation, whilst also replicating enough of what already works, if it ain't broke. But making sure that you cannot stop the testing and you cannot stop pushing that out there, and you never know when that next format that really works is going to start taking off.
And I feel I know this because I'm guilty of it, but before I started creating video content, I had a mental barrier where it was oh, I don't know if this is a me thing, or you create one and then you're oh, I'm not sure I like that. But actually it's more about the experimentation and going through the process, working out what you like, what you don't like. And so you're right, but also I feel in your personal life, just see what people are paying attention to. What do you pay attention to? What is engaging you?
Right. And also I think what's important in that as well is that like what you like putting out and what does well is not always going to be the same thing. And I would say if that is the case, make sure you're still doing the one that you like putting out. Because I think that it is incredibly important to make, like, that, again, it's just a recipe for burnout. Like, it's always going to put you in a situation where you're kind of, if you're always creating content that's not necessarily in an area that you want to or not necessarily in the style you want to. I have a kind of, I guess because I don't do content as a main part of my job anymore, I have this rule with myself that content I like is always good content, whether it performs well or not. And it's so easy to put something out there and to want to be like, oh my God, maybe I should take that down. That like really did not do well. But actually, if you liked that content and you felt really proud of it and you thought it was good, absolutely learn from the analytics. But not every video, the main KPI needs to be views or engagement or exposure. Maybe the main KPI for some of the content, in order for you to still feel enthused by it, needs to be you having enjoyed making that content and felt like it was really good content, even if it was for a smaller subset of people.
Cool, love that. And I love the fact that data's central to that, which is so important, and the experimentation and like failing fast. And I really love that. And I think that's so important about like understanding what you like doing and also growing as well. You're part of a generation that's kind of rising in the workforce. And I hate the idea of posing a blanket question to you about Gen Z. The same way if someone couldn't ask me,
I know them.
How do you motivate gays? I don't know, I can't speak on behalf of them. but like when you speak to your friends who maybe took a different path, or even some of your employees or colleagues, like what are the sorts of things that you hear that are motivating them?
I think that's a really good question. I think that there's no doubt that Gen Z seem to be a lot hackier and a lot happy. Did
you say hackier?
Hackier,
okay.
Yes, rather than
happier.
But might also be happier, who knows? Again,
hackier
can't
and
speak
happier.
on behalf of them. What I have noticed is the hackier side, which by that I mean happier to, sorry, getting very confusing here, happier to take more risks in order to be able to reach higher rewards, and happy to be able to kind of find different ways to do that. So whether that's with side hustles, whether that's for like trying something new or going to networking that might have nothing to do with like what they're already doing, or career changes, whatever it might be. I think that's definitely very true. Happier going self-employed earlier, all of these various different things. I think what that shows is that incentivization is incredibly important for Gen Z. And I think in a world where you can side hustle your way to really quite a lot of success, there's even just the perception of that success, because I wouldn't say that it's necessarily easy. Even just the perception of that success is going to mean that anyone who is in your organization is going to constantly have an eye on what they could be getting more somewhere else, whether that is working for themselves, whether that's working for someone else, etc., etc. I think that one of the really important things there is knowing what type of workplace you are then. I think that for me, it's been very important I definitely, at the beginning of my career, made the mistake of kind of being like, we're a family, like all of this. I actually think, again, I think that missells the workplace. We are a workplace. I'd love to be a really good place to work. However, if you come to the workplace at Tala, for example, and you think it's all going to be fun and family and hugs and excitement, then it's actually, you're not going to like it, and it's not going to be the right workplace for you. It's actually a workplace of people who want to work hard, want to take it to the next level, believe that they could lean in more and get more results. And actually, mis-selling that is not going to do much for that. But I think that there are so many different workplaces for different types of people. And I think what Gen Z seem to know more and seem to be getting quite savvy on is which type of workplace they will work best on, whether they would be better suited in a corporate one, whether they would be better suited in startup or self-employed, etc., etc. But I think in the first few years of their career then, which is still now, because I'm the oldest year of Gen Z and I'm 26, so only a few years into my career, I think with looking at that, it just goes to show that Gen Zs are all still very much in that stage of kind of like working out which type of sector or which type of work they would work best in. So I do think things like incentivization, but also being very clear on what type of workplace you are and what type of workplace you're not, also enables that kind of decision to be made in order to make sure there's that synergy between employer and employee and what might work, and also for that person individually as well, what might be the best type of work for them.
So it's like incentivization, motivation, these are all kind of like weighty topics.
Motivation, but also not mis-selling. And I think
Sure.
we definitely had this like middle 10 years where everything was like, we're a family, we're a family, we're a family, like we're really great, like all of these cool things, slides and ping pong tables. And don't get me wrong, love ping pong, would really love that in the office. We don't have the budget yet. But I also think that actually we're kind of smarter than knowing that that's what makes a workplace a good place to work. And therefore, is it the right workplace when you take away all of those things? Maybe not, maybe, but actually knowing those things and being able to differentiate what different types of work for different people, I think is really key when talking about Gen Zs in the workplace.
Do you think, obviously you took the entrepreneurial route, but so many others in that generation are, or if they're not, they're side hustling their way. Do you think like the corporate workplace is in need of a rebrand?
I think that because of the democratization of a lot more side hustles, a lot more self-employment, you know, you can probably take the leap a lot earlier because of things like social media.
Yep.
I think that there's definitely, I think we're probably in a spike.
Yep.
Of people who are deciding to move more away from corporate environments. And don't get me wrong, I think that the general move is still somewhat there.
Yep.
However, I think it's skewed at the moment because, as I said, we're still early on in kind of Gen Z career. And I also think that I think that whilst being self-employed and being an entrepreneur is very glamorized and gives this idea of increased flexibility where it's not necessarily always there, especially if you're going to go start a business that's, say, VC backed.
Yeah.
I think that it will probably settle a little bit more in the direction of actually lots of people are really suited to corporate work and lots of people like that. Like I've had lots of people who've had a conversation with me and be like, I actually do just want to be in a job where I, you know, I'm able to like know where I'm going every day, have that security, know what I'm getting, what I'm not getting, and when I'm able to go home and kind of like that is what I want. And other people who are just like, do you know what, this is not for me at all.
Yeah.
But I think there's definitely a rise in finding suitability to the individual for sure. I just don't think that can mean that for everyone they're not going to be suited to corporate.
For sure. And where you're in a quite unique position is that as a Gen Z CEO, you're probably one of the first people that's able to craft an employee experience around your values. What's something that you would say in your workplaces and your businesses that you would say are significantly different day to day to those kind of like stuffy old corporate workplaces?
Oh, them.
Them.
I think that I think it's quite hard to say what is the difference between me being 26 leading an organisation and me being Gen Z and leading an organisation.
More from a value perspective is the way I mean it. Like,
yeah, but I mean in terms of like the data I have, obviously my experience is based on being both a similar age to say lots of the people who are in the team or younger than lots of people that are in the team, and also being Gen Z, and I'm not sure which one is contributing to it. Yeah. I do think that one thing I try and do is I try and lead in a very collaborative way. I believe that I should be able to put my hand up and say, oh, that was my bad, you know, I asked for this, but you were right, you said like it wasn't coming from whatever reason and we were moving it there or whatever. I do think that I expect that both ways, and I say that very clearly from the beginning. I believe I think that being able to take responsibility and attribute responsibility rather than blame, I think is incredibly important and something where I think is essential in running a startup, especially, and working out where things could have gone better and not attributing blame, but attributing responsibility in terms of being able to work out like where that went wrong or where it could have gone better. I think that's one thing for sure. I think that I definitely learnt more of the hard way, the you know, as I mentioned, all of the like glamorization stuff, like work is always going to be work and a workplace is always going to be a workplace. As I said, I'd love for working with me to be something that people enjoy. It's probably not going to be for everyone, as being my friend is not going to be the same for everyone. And I think that that's something that I probably wish I'd learned earlier on, but now I'm learning it and very clear that actually I would rather sit in an interview and be like, this is generally what our work hours are like and this is generally what we'd expect, and less about kind of being like, I promise you we're a really great place to work and we're really like cool for like all of these reasons. I would rather find a good match. It's the same as like lying on a first date. Like it's probably just not going to be a good match. And so I think that that's something that I'm not sure whether I attribute to being a Gen Z thing and just kind of sign of the times, or being a younger leader thing.
Yeah. What I love about talking to you is that it's clear you've torn up the rule book and looked at it from your own perspective, and so you haven't done things because that's how things should be done. And I think it's really important that people see you as an example that leadership doesn't have to look, sound, feel, do the same things. And that's what I love about talking to you. So I think it's really important that people see that. How do you think employees would describe your style as a leader?
Terrible. Hopefully, you're joking. I think they would probably agree that I'm very collaborative and like to be in a. I like to approach everything on a level. Again, probably because if I'm talking to someone who is around my age and I'm coming into it and I'm saying, like, I don't believe that when I go into a meeting with anyone that I've hired for their expertise that I'm going to be better than them at that particular thing just because I started the company. And I think that I like to make that very clear. For example, I'm preparing for a meeting in a few weeks' time that is with our brand team, and it's looking at kind of really leveling up that area. Sorry, I sound like the government.
Yeah.
Really trying to bring that.
It caught on.
Yeah, I'm really trying to get to the next level in terms of that specific area. And when I'm going into that, it's not about me being like, these are all the things I want improved. It's more about, you are all here because I think you've got the answers to this, and I think we can all work this out together. Let's put things in place in order to be able to do this. I don't expect just because I have a vision for you to necessarily know that vision, and it is my duty for me to impart and share that with you. Otherwise, how on earth would you kind of know that? So I do think one thing that I hopefully do well is that I know that everyone I hired for a reason, and usually because they're far better than me at what they do than what I would be. And I think that creates the most powerful organisation, but also empowers people within your organisation to know where their strengths are, and also create an environment where hopefully they can be like, no, Grace, I really think that we should do it this way. And if someone feels that passionately about something, even if I'm like, I really want to do it this way, then I'm always like, great. If you feel that, I really want people to feel that strongly about something. If you feel that strongly about something, great, let's do it.
Love that. That's cool. So we're going to get ready to go to an audience Q&A. So for those of you that want to pose your questions, go into the Unite 23 app. You can post your own questions, vote up other people's questions that you think are good. So whilst people are getting oriented with that app, I'm actually interviewing Stephen Bartlett here tomorrow morning. He has this tradition on his podcast where he asks something on his podcast from the previous guest. What do you think I should pose to him tomorrow morning from you? Oh, shit.
You gave them time to prepare for their questions and no time for questions, which I think is a bit unfair.
It's fine. You take your time because I'm getting ready to orient myself to questions.
I will have a think about that.
Okay, cool. So we can do it offline. So come back tomorrow morning to find out what... So the top voted question I've got here is, how do you stick to your productivity method when something's on fire or requires your immediate attention arises?
So I think the most important thing about that is it is not a productivity method if it does not work when everything is on fire. But especially if you are running a startup, because everything is always on fire. So actually the productivity method was made in order to be able to fight the fires that are firing. So I think that is very important to establish, but I also I completely agree. If you wake up and you're in the middle of some sort of really big crisis, then it is going to be harder to just do your normal daily hygiene things that you do to make sure your kind of to-do list is done. So for me, it's all about making sure that my productivity method is actually in line with that type of thing. And it might even just be about making sure I have full visibility over everything that needs to be done in those specific methods. Again, the bulk of it is splitting up the to-do list and doing the 3 non-negotiables and categorizing it in that way. And I think that actually usually is the best way to deal with a crisis as well. So I would say that, but obviously sometimes I put that aside and go to those templates that I was talking about instead, which are very much the kind of problem-solving things with prompts specifically that I've got from past fires, which I will then add in for the next time. So it might be that I learned something better about how we can communicate it, or how I communicate it across the organisation, or how I deal with it, etc., etc. I will then put that into the prompt for next time so that I can...
It has to be baked in,
exactly,
otherwise it's not working.
Exactly.
So what's your advice for someone wanting to break free of corporate life to pursue passions at work? This isn't me, by the way, so if my boss is here.
Could you just read that again?
what's your advice for someone wanting to break free of corporate life to pursue passions as work?
So I think there is a lot online about the idea of like, just quit, like take the leap, etc., etc. The majority of people cannot just quit in any 1 second and be like, well, let's see if this works now. I think that it is incredibly important to create a safety net. That creating a safety net can be, and I was talking to someone recently who knows they want to start their own business, but have just been offered a potential pay rise and moving to a different part of the organisation. She was like, but I know I want to start my own business, so shall I just quit and start my business now? And I was like, no, take the pay rise, go to the other side of the business, but set yourself this next 6 months as the actual time where you're starting getting things down on paper. Even if that is just networking in the area that you want to go into, starting to get some like mission statements down, what type of problems you're solving, getting together your references in terms of like the types of companies or other self-employed people that you want to kind of be more like, or kind of like go into that type of sector. I would say that it's important to kind of set yourself those deadlines and also then create that safety net within that time, because then you're essentially able to more likely start at a point where you've got a bit of a pot aside. I think that there is this like, I just think it's completely unrealistic just being like, oh, just quit and do this. Creating yourself a safety net and creating yourself deadlines by which you can activate that safety net and know that like in 6 months I am jumping, but before I do that I create the safety net and do all the groundwork, but in order to be able to like probably get 1 or 2 clients as well, even if it's just small things, just to know that you can do it, so that by the time you start you're not really shooting into the dark.
Amazing. So this one I actually really like is, do you ever feel like that you're missing out on the kind of irresponsible 20s?
I mean, I can be irresponsible sometimes. I think...
It's on your to-do list. It's on your to-do list, yeah.
Non-negotiable today, be irresponsible. I would definitely say that there have been times that I've thought, like, what am I doing? Like, what am I doing? Like, especially when I was at university, right after university, I definitely looked back and I was like, I spent so much time coming down to London, really trying to, like, solidify myself within the industry, really trying to take more opportunities and really trying to grow up as fast as possible. And I definitely looked back at that time and I was like, why did you not just chill out? But again, I got all of the opportunities I then got at that time for doing that. It's so easy to look back in hindsight and be like, oh, but you should have done this. But how do you know that wouldn't have changed the trajectory? I think realistically, while I would like to say yes, I also think that I'm not this way because I'm pretending to be this way or because I think that I should be this way and I think I should work harder and all of this. I understand that I'm in a very privileged position, that this is a lot of how I get my joy. And I really like to challenge myself. It sounds like one of those interview questions where they're like, what's your biggest weakness? And I'm like, I'd really like to challenge myself and I like to push myself. But I genuinely get, like, the more I can work with people and challenge myself and put myself in rooms where I feel push and feel like I'm, to me that's fulfillment. I would say that there have definitely been times where I should have put personal life first and definitely kind of like had a bit more fun, but I also wouldn't say I'm not that. So, a little bit in between, but also knowing that just because other people see fun in a certain way doesn't mean that's fun for you.
Love that. I feel like we've grappled some like really big topics. We've gone from like the productivity to the content to like multi-generational workforce, and I think you picked up some of those like quite weighty, tough questions really well. So thank you so much. And audience, would you please join me in saying thank you to Grace with a round of applause. Thank you.